Kim Kaase here, transformative coach and consultant. Today I'm going to talk about listening. So, some of you might have already tuned me out thinking I'm a good listener. I already know this. So, if that's the case, I'm going to say this video is probably perfect for you. So just pause, settle in for a moment, and listen to what I'm going to say here. Like, consider that there might be something worth hearing. So a lot of times when I'm called into situations that involve teams, I get called in by leadership to solve problems, and many of them have to do with relationships. Okay, teams are maybe having trouble getting the results that they want, and they're also a lot of times really grappling with miscommunication. They struggle with making decisions. They people on the team may not get along, and people aren't really sure what to do with that. So a lot of times when I go to work with leadership teams, that's one of the issues. And what I want to talk about today is around listening, because to me, when we have trouble in relationships with people, in business or in life, listening is often at the root of that. So I want to talk about a popular way that people talk about listening that I think is actually a mistake. So this is why I said at the beginning, if you think you're a good listener, like if you've sort of been taught how to listen, this might be a good video for you to consider. So a lot of times people have been taught in the corporate world about active listening, like really being on it, like really kind of getting yourself at attention when you go into a conversation with someone, like ears perked up and really kind of having listening on your mind. Okay. And that actually is based on a misunderstanding. So it's based on a common misunderstanding that I often debunk with people. And that misunderstanding is that that our experience in a conversation, or in life really, but in a conversation, since we're talking about listening, like our experience is coming from the outside. Like it's coming from either other people or our situation or the stress and pressure of a job or whatever. And that active listening, when we have that misunderstanding, like it would take care of that, in a way. So I want us to put any notion we have about listening aside for a minute. And then I want to talk to you about a couple different ways that you might recognize that you listen, and then I'm going to ask you to consider a way that I think might be a better choice, something that if you want to garner trust and respect and alignment within your organization, I think it might be a better choice. So a lot of times we listen in a few different ways. I think a lot of times we listen to fix or solve a situation. So someone comes to us with whatever it is they have on their minds, whatever problem they're grappling with, and we sort of put on ears, again, that active listening of like, okay, I really need to fix or solve this for them, and in fact, so much so that we're probably coming up with solutions as we're listening, but see, it's impossible to actually listen if we're conjuring up solutions in our head. Okay, so that would be like the first way I think that's like a real barrier to actually listening to people. Then another way that's common that we listen in the business world in particular is like we're listening to respond. Like in other words, someone's telling us something, and instead of really listening, what we're doing is we're kind of thinking up our response in the meantime. Like, okay, here's what I'm going to say when they're not when they're through talking to me, when it's my turn, or sometimes we might even interrupt with that kind of stuff. And again, that's a barrier as well. Like that's not It's not a generative type of listening. And then the third way that I see a lot is, and this one is kind of the most stealth. This is a little harder to get our eyes on, but a lot of times we're listening to agree or disagree, or in other words, we're listening in the conversation for like, here's what I agree with, or here's what I disagree with. Okay, and that's interesting because a lot of times, again, with people we like or with people we have a good rapport with, we tend to do the first type, which is kind of listening for what we agree with. And then for people that we're sort of ready for, we kind of listen for things that we disagree with. So what I'm going to say with any of those types of listening, and to fix, solve, to respond, to agree or disagree, that there's something missing there, and that it's all kind of based on a misunderstanding. And what I want to ask you guys to consider is to, I'm going to describe this in a few ways, but basically listen to really understand another person. Okay, and to do that, we would really have to have not a lot on our minds. In other words, whether we agree with what they're saying or not, like that wouldn't be on our minds, or we wouldn't be thinking up solutions, we wouldn't be thinking of what we're going to say next. Like, we're really going to listen as much. Another way to describe it would be like really listening with nothing on our minds, or as little as humanly possible. Another way to describe this would be to listen to be impacted. Okay, now that's where, again, it might be a good place to talk about where that little misunderstanding comes in. Well, it looks like to me, or it looks like to a lot of people, like impact would come from what the other person's saying, like it's coming from the outside. And that's not really where it's coming from. It's, impact is something that we can generate on the inside. Like, in other words, it's listening to someone in a way to really let what they say land. You know what I mean? Like, it's again, when we don't have a lot on our mind, just automatically we can sort of let what they're saying land. And the beauty of this type of listening, in particular in healing team dynamics, is that it does several things. Like whenever someone, if there's someone in your life who has listened to you with not a lot on their mind, like you can tell they're really listening, like they're not conjuring up a solution for you, they're not listening to respond or disagree or agree. Like, what that does, and I'm sure each of you have had this happen, you've experienced this, is that it really starts to build trust with that person. When you can tell that they're really there with you in the conversation, letting what you say land, it really starts to build trust and respect and alignment. Even if after you've considered what they're saying, or they're considering what you're saying, even then, if you disagree, listening to really understand or be impacted, like you can hold that disagreement in a different place. And for two people to be in a conversation like that, where you're both listening that way, it just slows things down a bit. I don't know if you can kind of feel it as I'm talking about it, but it slows things down a bit. It opens the door for each person to have insight into what to do next, or insight into how the other person sees the world. It builds connection. And it starts to get more oriented to seeing that their own experience, so that like my experience is coming from what's going on in my head. you know, and your experience is coming from what's going on in your head. Like we start to see that more clearly, that you know, we're not really ever experiencing the other person. We're experiencing, when our minds quiet down, we start to see naturally that we're really experiencing our thoughts, you know, our thoughts moment to moment, you know, and that really starts to ground people. That, like, the truth of that, you know, starts to really ground people. So that's what I want you all to consider is I'm going to make a few more videos here. And you may, what I'd like to invite you to on this one is to maybe replay this video and listen to it to be impacted. You know, really practice what we're talking about. Like, really listen to understand. You know, listen to listen to it with not a lot on your mind, and just see if that opens the door to insight with you. You know, does anything bubble up as a result of that? And then I'd also like to invite you, as you go about your week, and you probably, if you're listening to this, you might have some relationships that are misaligned right now, or they might not have a lot of respect or trust in them. But I'd like for you to consider the people that you're not trusting, or you're not respecting, or they're not respecting you, or not trusting you. Like, I'd like for you to consider to try a different listening approach, to see what happens when you really listen, to be impacted by that person, and see if that opens up any doors for you. See if it opens up any new insight for you. Thank you.